Episode 5, The Final Curtain. The old theater loomed in the heart of the city, a phantom of a forgotten era. Its facade, etched with cracks, bore traces of past grandeur, faded bas-reliefs of angels. And demons seemed to whisper beneath layers of dust. The windows, murky with grime, caught the light of street lamps, casting glints like watchful eyes. Once, the stage had blazed with passion, the auditorium trembling with applause, but now silence reigned. Heavy as the velvet curtain, fog swirled around the spires, lending the building an ominous aura, as if it didn't stand but hovered above the ground, awaiting its moment. This place wasn't dying, it lived, guarding secrets no one dared speak aloud. James approached the doors, and their long creak like a moan shattered the silence. The air inside was damp, steeped in the scent of rotting wood, wax, and something acrid like ash. The fog seeped in behind him, creeping along the floor like the theater's breath. Each of his steps echoed, but the sound returned with a delay, as if someone in the darkness mimicked him. The walls, draped in faded velvet, shimmered in the dim light, their cracks forming patterns resembling faces. James felt this place wasn't merely abandoned, it watched him, luring him into its web. A shadow of the past. The theater wasn't the first place where James had felt the chill of an unseen gaze. The library with its vanishing books, the house on the hill with its bloody symbols, the auction with its missing paintings. The search for Helen Marlowe each case had left a scar on his soul. He was no longer just a detective chasing clues. He had become a piece in a game where the rules were written by shadows, and the truth dissolved like smoke. The theater, with its oppressive aura, was a new link. But James sensed that here, everything might end or begin anew. His intuition screamed the actor's death was no accident, but a thread leading to the mystery tying Helen, the books, the paintings, and the blood together. He entered the auditorium, and silence enveloped him like a shroud. The seats, coated in dust, stood in mute anticipation, their upholstery decayed, resembling the skin of a corpse. The stage ahead glowed under a single spotlight, its beam trembling as if afraid of the dark. James stepped closer, and his gaze fell on the actor's body, sprawled on the boards. The man lay in a pose too graceful for death, arms spread like wings, legs slightly bent as if frozen in a final bow. But his eyes, empty, glassy, devoid of spark, told the truth. This was no performance, death on the stage. The police insisted it was an accident. The actor fell during rehearsal, hit his head and died instantly, but James knew it was a lie. He knelt beside the body and his eyes caught the face calm, almost serene, with no trace of terror. The eyes stared at the ceiling, but they held only a bottomless void, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The skin was cold but not icy, as if death had come recently, though witnesses swore he'd collapsed an hour ago. A thin trickle of blood ran from his temple, but it was too neat, like it had been painted with a brush, part of the set design. The medic confirmed a fatal blow to the head, clean. But there were no signs of struggle, no scratches, no bruises, no tension in the muscles. The actor hadn't resisted, hadn't fallen in agony, he had simply faded, like a candle snuffed out. James examined the stage and noticed the boards beneath the body sagged, emitting a faint creak. He pressed harder, and a puff of dust mixed with black ash escaped from the crack. The same ash he'd seen at the house on the hill, at the auction, in the library, by the river where Helen's bag was found. His heart tightened. This was no accident. Behind the shadows curtain, his gaze fell on a corner of the stage, where an old backdrop loomed bulky, with peeling paint, concealing a nook filled with rusted gears and ropes that dangled like tendons. The mechanisms once used to raise scenery stood frozen, their cogs gleaming like teeth. Light didn't reach here, and the shadows were too dense, as if they devoured everything around them. James stepped closer, and the air turned icy, laced with the smell of dampness and burnt paper. A thin line of ash trailed across the floor, vanishing into the darkness. Someone could have hidden here, watching the actor, waiting. James touched the ropes, and his fingers felt a faint tremor, as if the mechanism still remembered motion. Behind the backdrop on the wall, he spotted a carved symbolist circle crossed by a line. The same mark from the library, the auction paintings, the house on the hill. Helen's diary, his blood ran cold. The theater wasn't a random place, it was the heart of a web that had ensnared him since his first case. Secrets behind the scenes. James questioned the actors, but their words were slippery, like the fog. They mumbled about rehearsals, but their eyes darted, their voices trembled, betraying fear. A young actress with shadows under her eyes whispered that the deceased had been acting strange, wandering the basement, talking about eyes in the dark. An elderly actor, his hands shaking, mentioned a curse of the stage but fell silent when he noticed James' attention. Their fear was tangible, like the scent of ash lingering in the air. He descended to the basement where the air was thick, steeped in the smell of earth and decay. Beneath a pile of posters, he found a crate covered in cobwebs. Inside was a diary, its cover cracked, its pages smelling of fire. The author, a theater worker from the 1930s, wrote of nightly visitors in cloaks, their voices like whispers from the grave. They performed rituals behind the stage, where actors became vessels for the fire of truth. The final line read, "The stage is their altar, the light is gone." James felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a theater, it was a sanctuary, archives of the past. In the theater's archives, he sifted through yellowed papers, old contracts, letters. The records spoke of disappearances, actors, directors. Audience members vanished, their names erased from history. In the 1940s, the theater was closed after 3 actors died, falling from the stage under similar circumstances. Officially, it was an accident, but a hidden letter mentioned a pact with the shadows. Each incident was marked by the symbolist circle with a cross. James recalled the library, where books dissolved into ash, the house on the hill, where blood formed patterns, the auction, where paintings vanished, the river, where Helen disappeared. It was all connected. He began to suspect the theater wasn't just a building but a nexus, where unspoken forces manipulated fates. Actors became pawns in rituals, the audience unwitting participants. James remembered a figure at the auction, seated in the back row, and realized he'd seen its shadow here in the corridor behind the scenes, and by the river where Helen vanished. The dark web. James pieced the threads together. The missing books from the library held knowledge of rituals. The house on the hill was an altar where those rituals fed on blood. The auction paintings were keys, encrypted messages. Helen Marlowe sought the truth but became a victim. The theater was the stage where it all would culminate. The actor's death wasn't random, he was chosen, like Helen, like others before them, to fuel what lived within these walls. The diary mentioned the Keepers of the Flame, a society that, for centuries, had collected artifacts, people, fates. Their trail stretched through the library, the house, the auction, the river, and now here. He returned to the stage. The curtain trembled, though the air was still. James pulled it aside, revealing a niche. Inside lay a painting, the portrait of the cloaked man from the auction, his eyes burning like embers. Beside it was a book from the library, its pages rustling on their own. On the floor, handkerchief, Helen's, steeped in ash. The circle and cross symbol was carved into the painting's frame. The floor shook, and the spotlight's beam turned crimson, bathing the stage like blood. Climax. The fire of truth. James realized the theater was the center where all his cases converged. He stepped toward the painting, and its eyes seemed to pierce him. The silence shattered, and a whispered dozens of voices poured from the walls, the floor, the air, truth and fire. He recalled the library, where books vanished in ash, the house on the hill, where blood drew circles, the auction, where paintings dissolved, the river, where Helen disappeared, leaving a note, the fire knows, and now the theater, where the actor died, the final sacrifice. He opened the book and its pages ignited. But the flames didn't burn, they danced, forming symbols. The circle with a cross burned brightest, and James understood it was a seal, binding everything: Helen, the books, the paintings, the blood, the stage. Crow's diary from the house on the hill, the records of the Keepers of the Flame, Their belief in a ritual to unlock the forbidden all led here. The theater was their altar, and he was the key they'd been waiting for. The stage quaked, and light burst from beneath the board's crimson, like the veins of the earth. The shadows in the auditorium came alive, taking the shapes of cloaked figures. Their eyes, pale as those in the paintings, stared at him. James realized the ritual had begun centuries ago. And everything, Helen's disappearance, the missing books, the paintings, the blood the actor's death was meant to draw him here. He wasn't random. The keepers had chosen him because he'd seen their shadows, because he hadn't stopped. But then he noticed another item in the niche, Helen's diary. Open to a page with her final words, "They watch. The circle doesn't lie." Beside it was her photograph, but the face wasn't hers, it was his own. Burned as if on the painting, his heart stopped. He recalled her words from the first case, "The fire knows." Helen hadn't just vanished, she was part of the ritual, as he was now. The keepers weren't seeking a victim, they were seeking him. To complete their plan. Instead of fleeing, James stepped to the center of the stage, where the actor's blood flowed, forming a circle with a cross. He touched the symbol, and the light blinded him, the voices growing louder. He could finish the ritual or break it. The diary's words surfaced in his memory. The fire doesn't lie, but it devours. He pulled out his lighter, held it to the book, and flames erupted, not crimson, but white, pure. They consumed the painting, Helen's handkerchief, the curtain, the stage, but left him untouched. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving like smoke. The floor stilled. The light faded, leaving the smell of ash. James stood alone, clutching Helen's charred diary. The theater emptied. And the darkness seemed to retreat, or perhaps it was merely hiding. An unexpected end. James stepped out of the theater, and the fog parted, revealing a sky studded with stars. He thought he'd destroyed the ritual, that the keepers of the flame were defeated. But at the exit, a figure awaited. A woman in a cloak, her face hidden by a hood. She stepped closer, and James froze. It was Helen Marlowe, alive, but her eyes burned like embers, like those in the paintings. She smiled, and her voice, cold as the fog, whispered, "You've started it, James. Now they see you." He stepped back, but she dissolved into the air, leaving a small object on the ground, a mirror from the auction, with the circle and cross symbol carved into it. In its reflection, James saw not himself, but the theater stage, where he stood over the actor's body, and behind him, dozens of cloaked figures. Among them Helen, her eyes burning brightest. The mirror cracked in his hands, its shards crumbling to ash. The street was empty. The theater vanished into the fog like a mirage. James realized he hadn't stopped the keepers. Helen wasn't a victim, she was their messenger. And he was their new piece in a game that had begun with her disappearance. The library, the house, the auction, the theater, all were stages where he'd played his role. Now they awaited his next move, and somewhere in the shadows, Helen watched, ready to lead him further or into the abyss.